I am 72 years old, and I never thought my own daughter would try to get rid of me. My name is Miriam Holliday, and I've spent most of my life in law, a career that has taught me to understand people and their motives. It's only my own daughter that I can't seem to fully understand. My home in Knoxville is the last thing left of my life. I specialized in international law and traveled halfway around the world on business trips. Edwin supported me, even though it was sometimes difficult for him. A man of his generation, whose wife earned more and was often away from home. Astrid, on the other hand, never understood my choices. Mom, why didn't you come to my performance again? She used to ask me when she was 12 and I missed the school play because of an urgent matter. Honey, I explained, I had an important trial. I couldn't cancel. You always have important trials. There's always something bigger than me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I did choose work over my daughter too often, but I wanted her to see before her an example of a strong woman who could succeed in a man's world. I wanted to secure her future, to give her the best education, to open doors that were closed to my generation. Instead of gratitude, all I got was resentment and grievances. After Edwin's death, our relationship with Astrid became even colder. She called once a month, came over on major holidays, always with her husband Killian and children, twins Rowena and Rexford, 12, and the younger Rosalind, 8. Killian I never particularly liked. There was something slippery, insincere about him. He worked for an advertising agency, always talking too loudly and laughing too long at his own jokes. Every time they arrived, I noticed him looking around the rooms appraisingly, as if estimating their value. A big house for an old lady, he'd said at Christmas dinner 3 years ago. Ever thought of moving to something smaller, Miriam? Maybe one of those lovely retirement homes? Thank you for your concern, Killian, but I'm doing just fine on my own, I said as I cut a piece of turkey. And I plan to do fine for at least another 20 years. His smile faded, and Astrid gave me a disapproving look. Mom, Killian's just worried about you. We're all worried. And I'm worried about how you're handling the mortgage on your house, I parried. Still paying 18% interest, honey? After that, the conversation turned to neutral topics, but I could see Astrid and Killian looking at each other. They wanted my house, the house that Edwin and I had bought before Astrid was born, paying off the loan for 25 years, the house where every single thing held memories. I had no intention of moving anywhere. Despite my age, I kept a clear mind and good health. I exercised every morning, went to the pool 3 times a week, and ran a book club for older detective lovers like myself. I set up a small carpentry workshop in the basement, an unexpected hobby I discovered after retirement. Astrid began to visit me less often. I used to think it was because of that Christmas conversation, but now I realize they were already planning. In April, the weather in Tennessee is especially nice. The magnolias are blooming. The air is filled with the scent of flowers, and the heat of summer has yet to set in. I was just working in the garden, pruning rose bushes, when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Astrid's silver SUV pulled up to the gate. She got out alone, without her husband or children, which in itself was unusual. Mom, she smiled, coming toward me. You look beautiful. Hello, Astrid. I took off my gardening gloves. What brings you here on a Wednesday afternoon? Shouldn't you be at work? Astrid worked in a museum store selling souvenirs and postcards, a job she found degrading, but with her incomplete education in art history, she couldn't find anything else. Took the day off, she shrugged. Thought we could have lunch together. It had been a long time since we'd had a heart-to-heart. I looked at my daughter carefully. She was 45, but she looked older than her years. Her dyed brown hair was in a sloppy bun, and she had wrinkles around her eyes that she tried to hide with a thick layer of foundation. Beautiful in her youth, She'd gotten fat early on, and now her figure had lost any shape under the shapeless dress. Sure, I agreed. Give me 20 minutes to get cleaned up. We drove to the Bluebird, a small downtown restaurant that served the best blueberry pancakes in Knoxville. Astrid was unusually animated, asking about my book club, my neighbors, even gardening, which she hadn't shown the slightest interest in before. Mom, I've been thinking a lot, she said when we had finished our coffee. We need to mend our relationship. I know that in the last few years there's been tension. That's putting it mildly, I said, stirring the sugar in my cup. Yeah, she sighed. I've realized a lot of things, especially after Rosalind went to school. It's really hard to balance work and motherhood. Not that I understand you completely, but I'm starting to. I've started to understand. I stared at her in silence, waiting to see where she was going with this. Anyway, I thought we needed some time together, like we used to, remember? You used to take me with you on business trips when I was little. I remember. I smiled involuntarily. You loved hotels, especially the little shampoos in the bathroom. Yes, she smiled, and for a moment I saw her as the little girl who used to collect miniature shampoo bottles and make towns of them on the hotel room carpet. So I found these amazing tickets to Portugal. Lisbon, Porto, small coastal towns. 2 weeks, just you and me. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Portugal? What about Killian, the kids? They'll manage. Astrid waved her hand. Killian's even happy to be alone with the children. He says he misses man time with Rexford, and the girls will help with the house. The offer took me by surprise. Astrid had never shown any interest in traveling. Even on their honeymoon, she and Killian only went to Miami, not anywhere in Europe or Asia. I don't know, Astrid. This is rather sudden. Please, Mom. She leaned across the table and took my hand. I really want to make this right, before it's too late. There was such sincere pleading in her eyes that my heart shook. Maybe she was really rethinking our relationship. Maybe she had finally grown up and realized that life was more complicated than she had thought when she was young. When are you planning this trip? I asked, still hesitant. In 2 weeks. I know it's soon, but it just happened to coincide with my vacation, and the tickets were at such a good price. In 2 weeks? I shook my head. Astrid, I can't drop everything and leave for another country with such short notice. I have commitments, meetings. What kind of commitments, Mom? There was a hint of irritation in her voice, but she pulled herself together. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. It's just, isn't that the beauty of retirement? You can do what you want, when you want. I leaned back in my chair, studying my daughter. Something about her demeanor alarmed me. Too much enthusiasm, too much sudden interest in our relationship. What's really going on, Astrid? What do you mean? She frowned. I just want to spend time with my mom. Is that so suspicious? Given our relationship over the past 20 years, yes, it's suspicious, I answered bluntly. So tell me the truth. Do you and Killian need money? Are you having trouble with your mortgage? Jesus, Mom. She splayed her hands. Why do you always assume the worst? Why can't you just believe that your daughter wants a relationship? Her eyes filled with tears, and I felt a prick of guilt. Maybe I really am too cynical. Maybe Astrid is genuinely trying to repair our connection. I'm sorry, I said softer. It's just so sudden. Give me a few days to think about it, okay? She nodded, blotting her eyes with a tissue. Of course, Mom, but don't take too long. The tickets might get more expensive. At home, I pondered Astrid's suggestion for a long time. Something told me it wasn't a clean slate. Why would she suddenly want to take me to Portugal? Why now? But another part of me, the part of me that had always longed for intimacy with my only daughter, wanted to believe that her intentions were sincere. I decided to consult Gertrude, my neighbor and closest friend of the past 10 years. Having been widowed around the same time, we often spent evenings over a glass of wine and frank conversations. I don't like this idea, Gertrude said when I told her about Astrid's proposal. Since when is your daughter interested in Portugal? And why so suddenly? I've been asking myself the same questions, I admitted, sipping my wine. But maybe I'm just being paranoid. Maybe she really wants to mend the relationship? Gertrude snorted. Honey, I've known you and your daughter long enough. If she wanted a relationship, she'd start with regular phone calls or Sunday lunches, not with a 2-week trip to another country. Her words made sense, but part of me still wanted to believe in the best. You know, Gertrude continued, if you really want to go, why not take some precautions? Just in case. What do you mean? Take spare credit cards with you. Keep copies of documents separate from the originals. And maybe don't tell Astrid about all your plans and itineraries. I laughed. Gertie, you make it sound like my daughter is planning to rob me or abandon me in a foreign country. But Gertrude didn't smile back. It's better to be safe than sorry. Also, tell her you're leaving me spare keys to the house and instructions on what to do in case of an emergency. Let her know that someone is looking out for you. I thought about my friend's advice. Maybe she's right, and a little extra caution wouldn't hurt. After all, I'm a lawyer, and I'm used to considering all eventualities. The next day, Astrid called to ask for my decision. After pausing for effect, I agreed. Really? Her voice sounded surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to agree. That's wonderful, Mom. I'm so glad. You won't regret it, I promise. It's going to be an amazing trip. I hope so, too, I replied, determined to follow Gertrude's advice and prepare for any eventuality. But I have a few conditions. Conditions? Her tone changed immediately. What kind of conditions? Nothing in particular. I want to have complete information about our itinerary, hotels, all the details of the trip, and I'll take care of my own travel insurance. Of course, Mom, she quickly agreed. I'll send you all the information today. One more thing, I added. I'll leave Gertrude with spare keys to the house and all the necessary contacts in case of an emergency. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Gertie, your neighbor? Why? Well, there's not much that can happen while we're away, I answered nonchalantly. A leaky pipe, electrical problems. Someone has to have access to the house while we're gone. Ah, well, Astrid visibly relaxed. Of course that's reasonable. It's just, maybe we should just leave the keys to us. We're family, not neighbors. You'd be too far away in case of an emergency, I argued. And Gertie lives across the street. After another pause, Astrid agreed. Okay, whatever you say. The main thing is that you're coming. Having finished talking, I thought about it. Astrid's reaction to the mention of the keys seemed strange to me. Why was she so excited at the thought of Gertrude having access to the house? Unless I pushed the disturbing thought away. No, I could not suspect my own daughter of such designs. It's absurd. I've worked with human guile for too long, and now I see it where it isn't. Still, following my professional habit of backing up, I decided to take extra measures. If my daughter is really up to something bad, she will find that an old lawyer is not so easy to fool. Lisbon greeted us with sunshine and an unexpected heat wave for April. As I stepped out of the airport, I greedily inhaled the air, filled with the smells of an unfamiliar city, a mixture of salty sea breeze, pastries from the nearest cafe, and the exhaust fumes of passing cars. We need to get a cab to the hotel. Astrid looked around, clutching the guidebook in her hands. The Hotel Alfama Vista, in the historic center. I nodded, trying not to show how tired I was after the 9-hour flight. Traveling like this wasn't easy at my age, but I didn't want to give Astrid any reason to think I was weak or helpless. As the cab sped through the streets of Lisbon, I looked at the city with interest. The hilly streets, the old buildings with peeling plaster and brightly colored tiles, the clotheslines between balconies, the red-tiled roofs. Everything was so unlike the neat streets of Knoxville. The hotel turned out to be a small, cozy building on a narrow cobblestone street. The room booked by Astrid exceeded my expectations. A spacious room with a view of the tiled roofs and the Tagus River in the distance, antique furniture, a tiled floor with an intricate pattern. "Do you like it?" Astrid asked, watching my reaction. "I knew you'd like this place. It's as old-fashioned as you are." There was no anger in her voice, but rather a clumsy attempt at a joke. I decided not to take offense. "It's beautiful," I said sincerely. "Thank you for choosing such a wonderful place." The first few days in Portugal went surprisingly well. We walked the winding streets of the Alfama district, climbed up to observation decks overlooking the whole of Lisbon, ate roasted chestnuts bought from a street vendor, and drank port wine in small taverns. Astrid was unusually attentive and caring, constantly asking if I was tired, if I wanted to sit down or go back to the hotel. On the third day, we went on a day trip to Sintra, a town not far from Lisbon known for its fabulous palaces. As we climbed up the steep road to the colorful Palace of Pina, I caught myself thinking that maybe I had been unfair to Astrid. Maybe she really did want to mend our relationship, and my suspicions were unfounded. Still, something was troubling me. Sometimes I caught my daughter looking at me with a strange gaze, appreciative, impatient. She checked her cell phone constantly, often going off to talk, and I could hear bits of conversation with Killian that were cut off as soon as I got close. On our fourth day in Lisbon, something changed. Astrid became irritable, talking to me less, constantly distracted by her phone. At breakfast, she announced a change of plans. "I thought we should change our itinerary. Instead of Porto, we'll go to Lagos. It's in the south, on the Algarve coast. It has amazing beaches and cliffs." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "But we were going to Porto the day after tomorrow. The tickets are already bought. The hotel is booked." "I canceled everything," Astrid shrugged. "And I've booked a new hotel in Lagos. You'll love it, I promise. It's a chance to see a very different Portugal." Her behavior alarmed me. Why change her plans so suddenly? And why didn't she consult me before canceling? "Astrid, I would have preferred to stick to the original plan. I really wanted to see Porto, with its famous wine cellars and bridges." "Mom," she interrupted me with a hint of irritation in her voice. "Trust me, okay? I've spent a lot of time planning this trip. Lagos is a beautiful place. There are far fewer tourists this time of year, and the weather is better." I could have argued, insisted, but I decided to give in. After all, the main purpose of the trip was to repair our relationship. If Astrid wanted to go to Lagos, then Lagos it was. "Okay," I agreed. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning," she answered, visibly relaxed. I had already booked the train tickets. Astrid was in high spirits all day. We visited the Oceanarium, one of Europe's largest aquariums, had lunch at a restaurant overlooking the April 25th bridge, very similar to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. In the evening, we returned to the hotel early. We had to pack for tomorrow's move. The next morning, I woke up with a headache. Maybe it was the change of climate, or maybe it was the red wine we drank the day before. Astrid ordered breakfast for the room: fresh croissants, fruit salad, coffee. "Take this pill." She handed me a small white pill. "It's for a headache. I don't want you to suffer all day." I took the pill but didn't swallow it. "What is it?" "Just ibuprofen." Astrid shrugged. "I always take a small first aid kit with me on trips. You know Killian. He's paranoid about health, and he taught me to be prepared." I looked at the pill with suspicion. It did look like regular ibuprofen, but my gut told me to be cautious. Thanks, but I have my own medication. I set the pill aside and pulled my own pack of painkillers out of my purse. I prefer to stick with what I know. Astrid's face flickered with irritation, which was quickly replaced by a smile. Suit yourself. I just wanted to help. We packed up and headed for the Oriente train station, a futuristic glass and concrete building that resembled giant trees. The train to Lagos was modern and comfortable. Looking out the window at the orange groves and white villages floating by, I felt drowsy. My eyes closed by themselves, and soon I fell into a deep sleep. I awoke to the train coming to a stop. My head felt heavy, my mouth was dry, and my eyes were double. I looked around trying to get my bearings and was horrified to find Astrid gone. Her bags were gone too, leaving only my suitcase on the shelf above the seat. Astrid? I called out, looking around. The neighboring seats were empty too. I struggled to get up and walked around the car, peering into the restroom and asking other passengers if they'd seen a woman with brown hair. No one could help. As I returned to my seat, I noticed a small note tucked into the pocket of the seat in front of me. Mom, I had to get off at the previous station because of an urgent call from Killian. Rosalind is sick. Continue on to Lagos. I'll join you tomorrow. The hotel is called Casa do Mar, booked in your name, Astrid. My heart raced. I didn't remember any stop, no call. Why hadn't Astrid woken me up to inform me of the problem? Why had she left a note instead of calling? And why had I overslept so much, even though I'm usually a light sleeper? Machinistically, I reached into my purse to pull out my phone and call my daughter. And then I got a new shock. There was no purse with my passport and wallet, no small backpack with spare cards and copies of documents. Panic came over me in a wave. I found myself in a foreign country, with no money, no documents, no phone, with only a suitcase of clothes. It couldn't be a coincidence. Astrid had deliberately left me in this position. I remembered Gertrude's suspicions, her warnings. I didn't want to believe that my own daughter was capable of such a betrayal, but the facts spoke for themselves. It was a planned act, and she had even tried to give me some kind of pill in the morning, probably a sleeping pill, to ensure my sound sleep during my escape. The train arrived in Lagos in the afternoon. I stepped down onto the platform, looking around, confused. Besides, Astrid hadn't technically committed a crime. She could say I'd lost my things or that it was a misunderstanding. No, I had to act on my own. The first thing to do was to find an American consulate or embassy. I walked up to the information desk at the train station. The young man behind the counter spoke English with a strong accent. Consulate? He frowned. There is no American consulate in Lagos. The nearest is in Faro, and the main one is in Lisbon. How far is it to Faro? I asked, feeling despair coming on. About an hour by train, but you need a ticket. He looked at me sympathetically. Are you in trouble, Señora? I briefly explained the situation, omitting the details of my daughter's betrayal. I said I had lost my bag with my documents and money on the train. Could I use the phone? I asked. I need to contact the consulate. The young man, whose name was Ricardo, was very helpful. He not only gave me the phone number, but also helped me find the number of the American consulate in Faro. The conversation was short. I was explained the procedure for recovering my documents and told that I had to go to the consulate in person with a police report on my lost passport. First the police, then the consulate. Ricardo nodded as I hung up. But how will you get to Faro without money? That was a good question. I didn't have a euro for a ticket or a credit card to buy one. I was trapped. Maybe the police will help, Ricardo suggested. They sometimes help tourists in trouble. The police station was a few blocks from the train station. Ricardo was kind enough to walk me there, explaining that his shift was ending anyway. On the way, I stole glances at Lagos, a small seaside town with white houses and narrow streets, strikingly beautiful despite my circumstances. At the police station, I filed a report for the loss of my passport and other documents. The officer taking the report spoke English well enough to understand the problem, but the process still took over an hour. Senora, he said when the paperwork was complete, we can't provide you with transportation to Faro, but there is an organization that helps tourists in emergencies. I can contact them. I nodded gratefully, feeling the fatigue and stress take over my strength. After hearing my story, she shook her head. Unfortunately, this happens more often than you think. Don't worry, we'll help you get to the consulate and find temporary housing. Sophia drove me in her car to a small hostel where the organization had an arrangement to house tourists in emergencies. The room was modest but clean, with a private bathroom and a sea view. Tomorrow morning, I'll take you to Faro to the consulate, Sophia said. For now, get some rest. Here's some money for dinner and necessities. She handed me 20 euros. It's from our organization. Alone, I sat down on the bed and for the first time all day, let myself cry, not from despair or fear, but from the bitterness of betrayal. How could Astrid do this to her own mother? Was the desire to own my house so strong that it outweighed all moral principles? The next morning, as promised, Sophia drove me to Faro, to the American consulate. The process of getting temporary documents was long and tedious, but by the end of the day, I had a temporary passport and the ability to get a money order. I called Gertrude using the phone at the consulate. When I heard her voice, I was so relieved that tears came to my eyes. Miriam, thank God, she exclaimed. I was beginning to worry. I called you several times, but your phone was unavailable. I briefly explained what had happened, trying to speak calmly, though I was seething with anger. That little brat! Gertrude's outrage was unparalleled. I knew she was up to something, but to abandon her own mother in a foreign country, that's a new level of meanness even for her. Gertie, I need your help, I said. Can you send me a money order? I'll be home as soon as possible. Of course, darling. How much do you need? We discussed the details, and Gertrude promised to send the money within the hour. Then she broke the news that made my heart pound even harder. Miriam, there's something going on. Astrid and Killian and the kids have moved into your house. They brought a truckload of stuff yesterday. I asked them where you were, and Astrid told me that you decided to stay in Portugal for a few months, that you found yourself, and asked them to look after the house. What? I couldn't believe the audacity of it. They moved into my house? Yes, and they had a sort of housewarming party last night. Noisy party. Lots of cars in the driveway. I even heard Killian bragging to someone about the new pool they're gonna install. Rage clouded my mind. They hadn't just abandoned me, they were already celebrating by taking over my property. They must have thought I could never come back, that I would get confused and give up. They didn't know me very well. Gertie, there's something else I'm going to ask you, I said, lowering my voice. Don't tell them I contacted you. Let them think their plan worked. In the meantime, I'll have a surprise for them. Oh, I'm already anticipating it, Gertrude said, gloating. You've always been good at revenge, Miriam. After talking to Gertrude and receiving the money order, I booked a plane ticket to New York with a layover in Lisbon. The flight was in 2 days. I couldn't make it earlier because of the high season and the limited number of seats. In the lobby of the consulate, waiting for all the formalities to be completed, I heard a familiar voice. Miriam? Miriam Holiday? Turning around, I saw a tall, gray-haired man with a familiar face. It took me a few seconds to recognize him. Lawrence Elliott? Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. Lawrence was a colleague of mine many years ago when I worked on an international case in Brussels. A talented lawyer specializing in real estate and probate law, He always had a sharp mind and an impeccable reputation. We haven't seen each other for almost 20 years. What are you doing at the Portuguese consulate? He asked, genuinely surprised to see me. I briefly told him about my situation, omitting the most painful details. Lawrence listened with increasing indignation. It's outrageous, he said when I had finished. And you say they have already occupied your house? Without your permission? I nodded, feeling the anger returning. I have some ideas on how to deal with this, but first I need to get back to the States. Let me help, Lawrence offered. I'm here on business for my firm, but I'm going back to New York tomorrow. We can fly together, and from there I can help you get to Tennessee. His offer was like a ray of light in the darkness. Flying with someone I knew, with a lawyer who could give professional advice, was so much better than traveling alone in my condition. Thank you, Lawrence. I thanked him sincerely, but I don't want to be a burden. What a burden! He waved me away. Besides, I owe you for the Brussels affair. If it hadn't been for your help then, my career might have taken a very different path. We exchanged numbers. Lawrence lent me his spare phone and agreed to meet the next day for dinner to discuss a plan of action. At the hotel where tourist assistants had put me up, I finally allowed myself to rest. The last 2 days had been like a nightmare, but now I had hope. The unexpected meeting with Lawrence seemed momentous. Who but an experienced real estate lawyer could help me fight the brazen invaders of my home? Over dinner at a small restaurant overlooking Faro Harbor, Lawrence gave me the news that made my heart sink. I had my assistant check the real estate records in Knoxville. Miriam, someone has applied to change the title to your house. It's dated yesterday. The return trip to Knoxville took 3 long days. First, a flight from Faro to Lisbon, then a transatlantic flight to New York, where Lawrence and I parted ways. He stayed in the city on company business, and I continued south with a layover in Atlanta. All this time I had a feeling of unreality, as if I were a character in a crime drama, not a 72-year-old woman returning to her hometown. Lawrence turned out to be a real lifesaver. Not only did he help with travel arrangements, but he also contacted his colleagues in Tennessee, who had already begun looking into my home situation. You have to be careful, he warned me before parting ways at JFK Airport. Don't go directly to the house. If they see you, they might do something desperate. They'll think you're stuck in Portugal with no money or papers, won't they? I nodded, well aware of the risks. Astrid and Killian had already proved that they were willing to go to extreme measures. Who knows what they'll do when they see me alive and well on their doorstep? I'll stay at Gertrude's, I decided, and first I would gather information about what was going on. When I finally landed in Knoxville, it was late at night. The cab didn't take me to my house on Magnolia Street, but to Gertrude's house across the street and 2 lots farther away. Despite the late hour, the lights in the windows of her house were on. She was waiting for me. Miriam! Gertrude opened the door before I could knock and hugged me tightly. Thank God you're back. She pulled me into the house and immediately locked the door, as if she feared that Astrid and Killian might track me down even here. You look exhausted, she said, eyeing me anxiously. Has the journey been hard? More tiring than hard, I replied, sinking into a chair in her cozy living room. Tell me what happened here while I was away. They completely took over your house, she began, taking a seat across from me. They brought in all their stuff, even started renovating some of the rooms. Your bedroom is now Killian's office. Can you imagine that? I nodded silently, feeling a wave of anger rising inside. My bedroom, where I'd spent so many years with Edwin, was now given to this smug, self-righteous bastard. They're telling everyone that you've decided to stay in Portugal, Gertrude went on. They say you fell in love with a local fisherman and decided to start a new life. Can you imagine? You're 72, and they're making up stories about resort romances. I snorted, imagining Astrid describing my non existent love idyll with a Portuguese fisherman to the neighbors. And most importantly, Gertrude leaned toward me, lowering her voice as if we might be overheard. They threw a party last night, a real housewarming party. They invited their friends and neighbors, music playing till midnight, kids running around the garden, Killian barbecuing on your new terrace. They settle in quickly, I said through gritted teeth. The next morning, after hours of restless sleep, I stood at the window in Gertrude's guest bedroom, looking toward my house. Even from here, I could see the changes. Astrid's SUV and some other unfamiliar car, probably belonging to Killian, were parked in the driveway. Children's bikes appeared by the porch and a brightly colored plastic slide on the lawn. Feeling up for a reconnaissance mission? Gertrude asked, entering the room with a tray of breakfast. More than ready, I replied, turning away from the window. I need to see what they've done to my house and hear what they say when they think I'm not around. After breakfast, we waited for Patrick to deliver the van. It was an inconspicuous gray car, like they use for deliveries perfect for surveillance. Mom said you had a covert operation to run? Patrick asked, smiling broadly. I'd always wanted to be involved in something like that. It's not a big deal. I tried to sound casual. I just wanted to look at my house without attracting attention. Gertrude and I got in the van. She at the wheel, me in the passenger seat. She at the wheel, me in the passenger seat, and drove slowly down Magnolia Street. As we approached my house, I felt my throat constrict. Even from the outside, it was obvious that the house had changed. Killian had managed to paint the front door bright red, replacing the noble navy blue I'd chosen years ago. The veranda had new faux rattan rocking chairs to replace my antique wooden ones, and the rose bushes by the path had been ruthlessly cut almost to the ground. They're ruining it, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. My house? We'll park farther away and wait, Gertrude suggested. It's Saturday. They'll probably be out of the house. We parked on a nearby street with a good view of my house and waited. Around 11 o'clock in the morning, Astrid and her youngest daughter came out of the house. They got into the car and drove off. A short time later, the twins showed up. They rolled their bikes out and sped off toward the park. Killian should be home alone, said Gertrude. Shall we come closer? We drove slowly up to the house and parked across the street. From here, we could see the backyard, where Killian was working on his lawnmower. He's mowing my lawn, I muttered, and apparently he has no idea how to do it right. We watched for about an hour as Killian struggled unsuccessfully with the machinery. Soon Astrid and her daughter returned, laden with bags from the supermarket. Then the twins drove up, and the whole family disappeared into the house. Look, Gertrude elbowed me. I think they're having guests again. Indeed, cars started pulling into the driveway one by one. Soon the backyard was filled with people. We need to get closer, I decided. I want to hear what they're saying. We got out of the van and, trying to remain inconspicuous, made our way to the hedge that separated my lot from the neighbors. The hedge was thick enough to hide us, but through the gaps between the branches, we could see what was going on. Killian was at the grill, turning steaks and loudly telling a story to a group of men. Astrid was sitting in a chaise lounge, sipping wine and laughing at something her neighbor, Mrs. Potter, from across the street was saying to her. And you can imagine, she actually believed we were taking her on vacation. I heard Astrid's voice. In fact, we just wanted to get rid of her once and for all. Mrs. Potter looked shocked. But how could we, Astrid? She's your mother. Has she really decided to stay in Portugal? Astrid laughed even louder. Of course not. Mom would never do anything spontaneous in her life. She's a lawyer to the core. Everything is planned. Everything is by the book. Astrid took a sip of wine. No, she's probably wandering the Portuguese streets right now, trying to find her way home. Did you You left her there? Mrs. Potter looked stunned. But it's, it was necessary. Astrid cut her off. She would never have given us the house willingly. And it's too big for one old woman. Besides, she's always been a terrible mother. Always at work, always with her clients. I was just returning the favor. I felt Gertrude squeeze my hand, either as a sign of encouragement or to keep me from immediately intruding on the party. Mrs. Potter was clearly uncomfortable. And yet, leaving an elderly person in a foreign country. Don't worry. Astrid waved it off. She's an international lawyer after all. She might even be able to come back. But by then, the house would be officially ours. Killian had already filed the papers. At that moment, Killian himself came to their table, carrying a plate of roast meat. "What are you ladies whispering about?" he asked, winking at Mrs. Potter. "Your wife was telling me about your unusual strategy for buying a house," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "Oh, that." Killian smiled broadly. "Don't worry, the old woman will be better off there. Mediterranean climate, fresh fish, wine. At her age, that's all you can dream of. If she's still alive at all," Astrid added as nonchalantly as if she were talking about the weather. "At her age, with no money and no papers, in a foreign country, I wouldn't be surprised if she just couldn't take it." "Astrid," Mrs. Potter exclaimed, "how can you say that?" "Relax, Eleanor." Killian put his hand on Mrs. Potter's shoulder. "Miriam is a tough nut to crack. She's probably enjoying a well-deserved vacation on the Portuguese coast right now. And we're finally getting the home we deserve. Look at the kids. They need room to play. And the backyard is perfect for the pool I've always dreamed of." At that moment, Killian was called away by the other guests, and he stepped away, leaving Astrid and Mrs. Potter alone. "Don't worry so much," Astrid said, noticing the look on her neighbor's face. "My mother is a selfish woman who has always thought only of herself and her career. All her life she had bossed me around, and now she wanted to boss my children around." She took a big sip of wine. "The house should have rightfully belonged to me a long time ago. She just didn't want to admit she was too old to live alone." "And yet," Mrs. Potter began, but Astrid interrupted her. "Do you know what she said before the trip? 'Astrid, don't forget that this house will never be yours. I plan to live another 20 years and leave it to the town for the library.'" The library. Not to my own daughter and grandchildren, but to the damn library. I never said anything like that. But Astrid's lie seemed to make the right impression on Mrs. Potter, who shook her head sympathetically. "So let us drink to a new beginning, to our new life in this beautiful house, without the mean old woman who will never come back here again." Astrid raised her glass, and Mrs. Potter reluctantly raised hers. I felt I'd had enough. I needed a plan, not an emotional confrontation. "Let's get out of here," I whispered to Gertrude. I had heard enough. We carefully backed away from the hedge and walked back to the van. Back at Gertrude's place, I sat down at the phone. The first call was to Lawrence, who informed me that his colleagues in Knoxville had already gathered information about Killian's attempt to change the ownership of my house. "They filed a report claiming you voluntarily gave them the house," Lawrence said. "They even presented some paper with your alleged signature." "I'm here now," I replied, "and I'm ready to prove that I never signed such a document." "There's something else," Lawrence continued. "My colleagues have checked your will. You made changes after Edwin's death, didn't you?" "Yes," I confirmed. 4 years ago, I set up a trust for the house." "That's right, and according to that trust, the house can't be sold or transferred without the consent of the trustee, and the trustee is, First Tennessee Bank," I finished. "More specifically, its trust department." That was good news. I'd actually amended my will after Edwin died, creating a trust that made it nearly impossible to sell or transfer the house quickly. It was a precautionary measure in case I started having health problems and someone tried to take advantage of my condition. When it got dark and Gertrude had gone to bed, I quietly slipped out of the house. I needed to get into my own house, and I knew how to do it discreetly. When Edwin and I had first bought the house, we had discovered a secret passage from the basement to the garden, a remnant from the Prohibition era, when the basement had probably been used to store contraband alcohol. The passage was narrow and awkward, but fully functional. Over the years, no one but Edwin and I had known of its existence. Making my way through the neighbors' plots to the back of my garden, I felt a rush of adrenaline. The entrance to the secret passage was cleverly disguised as an old compost heap in the far corner of the garden, behind thick lilac bushes. I carefully pulled back the false lid and saw a narrow staircase leading down. Walking down the steps and through the narrow tunnel, I reached a wooden door leading to the cellar. The door opened inward and was disguised on the other side as a wine cabinet. I pushed it open gently, and the hinges, which Edwin lubricated regularly, did not fail. The basement, where my carpentry workshop used to be, was now piled with boxes and old furniture, probably Killian and Astrid's things they hadn't had time to unpack yet. I walked over to an old secretary that stood in the corner. It was an antique piece that I had inherited from my grandmother. Pushing a hidden button, I opened the secret compartment where I kept important documents, duplicate deeds to the house, spare keys to the safe deposit box, several $1,000s in cash, and most importantly, the trust fund documents. After putting the papers and money into a small bag, I pulled out of my pocket several miniature cameras and voice recorders I'd bought this afternoon with Patrick's help. A man trying to defend his home from invaders has a right to know what's going on inside, especially if those invaders are his own daughter and son-in-law who have fraudulently taken possession of the property. I placed the devices at strategic points in the basement, providing a view of the stairs and main passageways. Now I would be able to monitor what was happening in the house through the app on the phone Lawrence had given me. Finished as I left the house through the secret passage, I knew exactly how I would make Astrid and Killian regret their betrayal. The next morning was clear and sunny, the perfect weather for justice. I woke up in Gertrude's guest bedroom long before dawn, refreshed by the feeling of impending victory. Sleep was deep and restful, for the first time since Astrid had left me in Portugal. We have a warrant for the records check and a statement from the bank about possible attempted fraud. I nodded, appreciating his professionalism. Thank you for your promptness. It's nice to see the legal system working properly sometimes. We piled into 3 cars and headed for my house. On the way, Jeremy reminded me again of the plan of action. First, the police and bailiff will serve the warrant. Then the bank representative and I will go in to do an ID check. You will stay outside until we make initial contact. Then we will invite you in for formal identification and statement. I stayed in Jeremy's car while the police officers and the bailiff went up on the porch. The doorbell rang loudly and insistently. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Killian's sleepy face appeared in the doorway. Even from a distance, I could see his expression change from sleepy irritation to outright fright. The bailiff said something, holding out papers. Killian tried to object, but the policeman remained adamant. Finally, he let them inside, and the door closed behind them. Now it's our turn, Jeremy said after a few minutes of waiting. We entered the house. It was chaotic inside. Astrid, dressed in a silk robe, looked completely shocked. Killian was arguing with the bailiff, waving some papers around. The twins were frozen on the stairs, and little Rosalind was clinging tightly to the banister, clutching a teddy bear to her chest. "This is absurd," Killian shouted. "We have every right to this house. Mrs. Holliday gave it to us before she left." Then why weren't the documents properly processed through the bank, which is the trustee of the trust fund? The representative from First Tennessee asked calmly. Killian stammered, his face pale. What trust fund? At that moment, I decided it was time to show up. Stepping forward from behind Jeremy's back, I spoke up. About the trust fund I set up 4 years ago, Killian, to protect my home from people like you. Astrid seemed to see a ghost. She staggered back and grabbed the wall for support. Killian froze with his mouth open, his eyes widening in horror. The children looked from their parents to me and back again. Mom? Astrid finally squeezed out. But how can you? You're supposed to be in Portugal. Without money, without papers, abandoned by your own daughter? I raised an eyebrow. Yes, that was your plan, wasn't it? We walked to the living room. Jeremy began. We have a report of attempted real estate fraud. Mrs. Holliday claims she never signed the deed to the house. Furthermore, we have reason to believe that the signature on the documents you submitted is a forgery. That's ridiculous. Killian tried to object, but his voice trembled. And that's why you decided to leave her in a foreign country without money and documents? Asked the bank representative with contempt. Jeremy put another document on the table. This is a statement from the trust fund created by Mrs. Holliday 4 years ago. According to this document, the house is the property of the trust, not Mrs. Holliday's personal property. Any transfer or sale of the house requires the consent of the foundation's trustee, First Tennessee Bank. A bank spokesman added, the bank regards the attempted change of ownership as fraud. We have already filed a formal complaint and are demanding the immediate vacating of the premises. By illegal occupants? Killian exclaimed. We are Miriam's family, a family that abandoned an elderly woman in a foreign country with no means of subsistence, reminded Jeremy. Not only is that real estate fraud, but potentially leaving someone in a dangerous situation is a felony. Astrid turned even paler. She shifted her gaze to me. Mom, you can't seriously accuse us of a crime. We're your family. Family doesn't do that, Astrid, I replied coldly. I could have died back in Portugal. Have you thought about that? At that moment, a soft sob came from the hallway. Rosalind was crying, clutching the bear tightly to her. Rowena had her arms around her shoulders, and Rexford stood stone-faced. Children, I addressed them more gently. Why don't you go into the kitchen and make yourselves breakfast? Astrid and Killian were defeated, and they knew it. They had an hour to gather the bare essentials. The rest could be picked up later. The children sat quietly in the kitchen, trying to figure out what was going on. Grandma? Rosalind asked. Why are the police here? Did we do something bad? I walked over to her and gently stroked her head. No, sweetie. You haven't done anything wrong. These are grown-up problems. Do we have to leave? Rexford asked, trying to speak firmly. Yes, you have to leave, I answered honestly. But not because I don't love you. It's just that I own this house, and your parents didn't ask permission before they moved in. But Mom said you gave us the house, Rowena said, frowning her eyebrows. She said you decided to live in Portugal with some fishermen. I barely contained a laugh. That's not true, Rowena. I never wanted to stay in Portugal, and certainly not with a fisherman. I love my home, and I want to live here. Why do grown-ups lie all the time? Rosalind finally asked, with the directness that only children are capable of. Not all grown-ups lie, dear. I sat down beside her. But sometimes adults want something so badly that they're willing to tell a lie to get it. An hour later, it was over. Astrid, Killian, and the kids loaded the essentials into 2 cars and left my house. When everyone was gone, I was left alone in the silence of my home. I slowly walked around all the rooms, assessing the damage. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the wall where Edwin's portrait used to hang. Now there was a gaudy reproduction of some abstract artist. I took it down and set it aside, determined to return it to its rightful place as soon as I found it among the things stacked in the basement. The ringing of the telephone interrupted my thoughts. It was Gertrude. "Well, is it done?" she asked impatiently. "Yes," I answered, sinking into my favorite chair. "They're gone. The house is mine again. And how do you feel?" I thought for a moment. Empty, satisfied, sad, all at once. "Would you like me to come over?" Gertrude suggested it. "We could open a bottle of wine, celebrate your victory." "Thank you, but not tonight," I replied. "I need to be alone, to settle back into my own home." When I finished talking, I looked around the room again. Despite all the changes Astrid and Killian had made, it was still my home. And now that justice had been served, I had to decide what to do next. Because simply returning home couldn't heal the wound of betrayal by those closest to me. The police cars were gone, the bank representative and the bailiff were gone. Only Jeremy remained, gathering the remaining paperwork and preparing for the next legal steps. I sat in my chair trying to make sense of what had happened. Getting the house back was only the first step in restoring justice. "Mrs. Holliday," Jeremy approached me with a folder in his hands. "I've prepared a preliminary statement for the prosecutor's office. If you decide to press criminal charges against Astrid and Killian, we'll need your signature." I took the folder, but I was in no hurry to open it. "Let's hold off on that. I have a few more questions for my family." Jeremy nodded understandingly. "Sure, I can wait in the car if you want to talk to them alone." "That would be nice," I agreed. "But don't go too far away. They could come back at any moment." As soon as Jeremy was out, I pulled out my phone and dialed Astrid's number. A few beeps, and she answered, her voice tense with a hint of panic. "What now, Mom? You've already kicked us out of the house. What do you want?" "A conversation," I answered calmly. "A real talk, Astrid. I want to hear the truth from your lips, not guess at your motives." There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "What's the point? You won't believe a word I say anyway." "Try it," I suggested. "If not for me, then for your children. They deserve to understand what's going on." Another pause, then. "We're at a motel on the way out of town." "The Pine Haven, you know the one?" "I know." I nodded, though she couldn't see the gesture. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. The Pine Haven Motel was a typical roadside establishment, a two-story building with rows of doors facing the parking lot, a faded neon sign, and plastic chairs in front of each room. I parked next to Astrid's car and wondered for a moment if I was doing the right thing. Maybe I should have just handed the case over to justice and forgotten about them. But something inside me demanded closure on this chapter of my life. Not legally, but emotionally. I wanted to understand how a daughter I'd raised with love could turn into a person capable of such betrayal. The room door was opened by Rowena. Her eyes were red with tears, but she tried to hold herself with a dignity that was so uncharacteristic of a 12-year-old. "Grandma's here," she announced to the room, letting me inside. The room was cramped for 5 people. 2 double beds, a small table by the window, a tiny bathroom. Rosalind was sitting on one of the beds, hugging the same teddy bear. Rexford stood at the window, looking defiantly out at the parking lot. Astrid and Killian sat at the table, with cups of cheap motel coffee. "Thanks for coming," Astrid said without much warmth. "Why don't you kids go for a walk? We need to talk to Grandma." "But there's nowhere to walk," Rexford objected, not taking his eyes off the window. "Just the parking lot and the gas station across the street." "Then stay in the bathroom," Killian said sharply, clearly nervous. "The bathroom?" Rowena looked at her father in disbelief. "Really?" I intervened. "The children can stay. They're old enough to realize what happened. Besides, it concerns them too. Killian wanted to object, but Astrid stopped him with a gesture. Okay, let them stay. Maybe it will teach them that in life, you don't always get what you want. That phrase, spoken with bitterness, told me a lot about how Astrid viewed our family dynamic over the years. I sat on the edge of the bed where Rosalind sat. The baby didn't move away, which I took as a good sign. So, I began, looking at Astrid and Killian. I want to hear the whole story. When did you decide to get rid of me? Was it a spontaneous idea, or had you been planning it for a long time? Astrid and Killian looked at each other as if deciding who would start first. Finally, Killian coughed. Look, Miriam, this looks worse than it really was. We never meant to hurt you. We just needed help. Help? I raised an eyebrow. So you left me in a foreign country with no money and no papers? We were desperate, Astrid interjected. You don't know what it's like to live from paycheck to paycheck, worrying about whether you'll be able to pay the mortgage next month, whether you'll have enough money for the kids' school supplies. And here you are, alone in a huge house with your pension and savings. So instead of asking for help, you decided to steal my house? I shook my head. That's a brilliant plan, Astrid, worthy of a lawyer's daughter. We panicked, Killian said. The bank was threatening to foreclose on our house. We had debts. What debts? I asked bluntly. Again, an awkward exchange of glances. Killian had invested in a friend's startup, Astrid finally admitted. It was supposed to make a lot of money, but the company went bankrupt. We lost all our savings. How much did you invest? I shifted my gaze to my son-in-law. Killian lowered his head. $120,000. $120,000? I couldn't hide my surprise. Where did you get that kind of money? We took out a second mortgage on the house, Astrid said quietly. And then we couldn't make both payments. I took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the situation. My son-in-law, who had always dreamed of getting rich quick, decided to gamble and lost. And my daughter let him risk the roof over her children's heads. And instead of admitting your mistake and asking for help, you decided to get rid of me and take over my house. I summarized. We didn't see any other way out, Astrid said quietly, not looking up. You've always been so flawless. You always knew the right thing to do. We were afraid of your judgment. So this was punishment for my perfection? I couldn't believe my ears. You'd rather commit a crime than admit to a mistake? We didn't think it was a crime, Killian said quickly. We thought it was just a solution to a family problem. The house was going to go to Astrid at some point anyway. Not necessarily. I looked him straight in the eye. I could leave it to my grandchildren or sell it and donate the money to charity. The house is my property, and I alone decide its fate. At that moment, Rexford, still standing at the window, turned and said with undisguised contempt in his voice, Did you really think you could get away with it, abandoning your grandmother in a foreign country? Killian turned sharply to his son. This is grown-up business, Rexford. You don't understand. I do understand. The boy crossed his arms across his chest. You cheated your grandmother. You stole her house. You hoped she couldn't come back. It's, he was searching for the right word. It's despicable. Rexford, Astrid exclaimed. Don't you talk to your parents like that. How should I speak to them? Parried the boy. You always taught us not to lie, not to steal. And what have you done? I looked at my grandson with a new respect. In his 12 years, he showed more moral fortitude than his parents. At school, they teach us that families should support each other, Rowena added, her voice trembling. Not to abandon grandmothers in other countries. Astrid covered her face with her hands. God, even our children are against us. They're not against you. I said softly. They just understand the difference between right and wrong, and that honors you as parents, no matter what. I turned to the children. Thank you for supporting me, but I want you to know that no matter what happens between me and your parents, I will always love you and take care of you. Rosalind, who had been silent until now, suddenly asked, "Will you take us to your place if Mommy and Daddy go to jail?" This innocent question hung heavy in the air. Astrid straightened up sharply, fear reflected in her eyes. "Prison?" she repeated. "Mom, you can't—" "I don't want you to go to jail," I said firmly, "but you will have to face the consequences of your actions." I pulled the folder I'd brought with me out of my bag. "I've collected a lot of documents over the years, Astrid. Remember that time you tried to withdraw money from my account by forging my signature? You were 19 and I didn't go to the police. Or the time you borrowed my jewelry and pawned it? Or the time you and Killian tried to get me to sign a power of attorney to manage all my assets while I was in the hospital with pneumonia?" I opened a folder and laid some documents on the table. "I have copies of all these cases, witness statements, photographs, even tapes of conversations. I didn't mean to use this against you, Astrid. You're my daughter, and I hoped you'd grow up, realize the value of honesty. But you kept going down the same path." Astrid's face turned ashy gray. You, you've been following me this whole time? Putting together a dossier on your own daughter?" "No," I shook my head. "I was just protecting myself, documenting every time you tried to manipulate me or my finances. This isn't surveillance, Astrid. It's self-preservation." Killian picked up one of the documents, a copy of a letter from the bank confirming an attempted withdrawal from my account using a forged signature. "Why are you showing us this?" he asked, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. "To threaten you?" "To make you realize the gravity of the situation," I replied. "What you did in Portugal was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of behavior. And now you're faced with a choice." "What choice?" Astrid asked. "You can plead guilty, compensate me fully for moral and material damages, undergo financial counseling and family therapy, or I can hand over all these documents to the prosecutor's office and then the court will decide your fate." Rowena sobbed quietly. "Please don't go to court. I don't want the school to know." My heart ached at the sight of my granddaughter's suffering. Children shouldn't have to pay for their parents' mistakes. "I'd prefer the first option," I said more gently, "for the sake of the children, but the decision is yours." Astrid and Killian looked at each other, apparently realizing that they really had no choice. "What exactly do you want us to do?" Astrid finally asked. "First, a written confession of everything that happened." I began to curl my fingers. "Secondly, a full refund of all my expenses for returning from Portugal. Third, you'll both sign up for therapy, individual and family. Fourth, you will find a legal way to resolve your financial problems without shenanigans or fraud. And finally, you'll stay out of my house until I decide to invite you over." "And the children?" Astrid asked. "Are they not allowed to see you either?" I looked at the grandchildren Rexford still standing at the window with a determined expression, Rowena furtively wiping away tears, and little Rosalind cradling her bear. "The children can come to me any time they like," I said. "I'm their grandmother, and nothing will change that. But you and Killian are different." Astrid looked like she wanted to object, but Killian put his hand on her shoulder, stopping her. "We agree, Miriam. We have no choice in the matter, but how do we solve our financial situation? We've lost our house. We have no savings." "It's not my problem," I replied firmly. "You're adults. Get a job, get an apartment, live within your means. Do what millions of other people in difficult situations do without trying to steal other people's property." Rexford suddenly moved away from the window and sat next to me on the bed. Grandma, can we stay with you? At least for a while, until my parents find a new place to live? The question caught me off guard. I looked at my grandson, then at his two sisters, whose eyes lit up with hope. Astrid tensed, ready to protest. Because sometimes adults hurt each other in ways that are hard to forgive, I answered honestly. But that doesn't mean I don't love you, or even your mom. It means we need time and space. Astrid suddenly burst into tears, not quiet tears of manipulation, but real, deep sobs coming from her very soul. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I've ruined everything, she sobbed. Everything, everything. I looked at my daughter, the woman I had once held in my arms, taught to walk, read her bedtime stories. Despite all her betrayals, a part of me still saw her as that little child in need of a mother's love. Yes, you ruined a lot of things, I agreed. But not everything. You have children who love you no matter what. You have a husband who, for all his faults, is there for you. And you still have a mother who, though she can't forgive now, will never stop wanting the best for you. Astrid raised a tear-stained face. Really? Do you still care about me? After everything I've done? I'm your mother, Astrid, I answered simply. That doesn't turn off like a light. I'm disappointed. I'm angry. I don't trust you. But somewhere deep inside, I still hope you can change. Be a better person. Killian put his arm around his wife's shoulders. We'll get through this, Astrid. We'll find a way to make things right. But how? She looked at him lost. We have nothing left. You have each other, I said. Start small. Find a modest place to live that you can afford. Killian, you might have to look for a second job. Astrid, you could use your art history education more effectively. Museums are always looking for tour guides. Live within your means. Learn to save money. It's not the end of the world, just a new beginning. Rosalind suddenly got off the bed and came over to me. Grandma, can I give you Mr. Fluffy? She handed me her teddy bear. It protects you from bad dreams. You must be having nightmares after being alone in a foreign country. This simple gesture of childlike love and care touched me to the core. I took the bear gently. Thank you, sweetheart. But won't you miss Mr. Fluffy yourself? I will. She nodded seriously. But you need him more, and I can come and visit him. Of course you can. I hugged the little girl. You can come anytime you want. I looked at Astrid and Killian, still sitting at the table with slumped shoulders. I'll leave you the address of my lawyer. I expect you at his office by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to sign all the necessary documents. If you don't show up, our next meeting will be the courtroom. I stood up, holding Rosalind's teddy bear in my hands, and headed for the door. Before I left, I turned around one last time. One more thing, Astrid. I won't help you financially, at least not directly. But I will pay the children's school fees and open accounts for their college. They shouldn't have to suffer because of your mistakes. Astrid nodded, unable to utter a word. Leaving the motel, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. The anger and pain of betrayal hadn't disappeared, but something else had been added to it. Not forgiveness. No, it was too soon for that. It was more of a realization that life goes on, and that even the deepest wounds could eventually, if not completely heal, at least heal. Jeremy was waiting for me in the car, as promised. When he saw me with the teddy bear in my hands, he raised his eyebrows in surprise, but refrained from commenting. How did it go? He asked, starting the engine. None. Better than I expected, I replied, looking out the wash window, where the silhouettes of my family were still visible behind the curtain. They've agreed to my terms. They'll come to you tomorrow to sign the papers. And the criminal charges? Jeremy glanced at the plea folder lying on the back seat. We'll hold off for now, I decided. Give them a chance to make amends, for the sake of the kids. Jeremy nodded without arguing. As a good lawyer, he knew that sometimes an amicable settlement was better than a long and painful trial, especially when it came to family matters. On the way home, I watched the streets of Knoxville, the city that had become my home years ago, float by. I thought about my life, the career I was proud of, the husband I lost, the daughter I may never have fully understood, and the grandchildren who, against all odds, grew up to be good, sensitive children. Perhaps that was the main lesson of the whole situation. In the end, it's not what we have that matters, but who we become and what values we pass on to the next generations. And judging by my grandchildren, despite all of Astrid's mistakes, she did get something right. It had been 3 months since the day I returned from Portugal and regained control of my house. I sat on the veranda, watching the seasonal changes in the garden. The roses had bloomed, but the fall chrysanthemums were already beginning to bloom, creating a new palette of colors. Astrid and Killian, as promised, signed all the necessary paperwork from Jeremy, a written admission of guilt, a waiver of claims to my house, an agreement to compensate for damages, and a commitment to undergo couples therapy. I insisted on the last paragraph, not so much for their sake as for the sake of their grandchildren. However, the consequences of their behavior were more serious than I had anticipated. Mrs. Potter, my neighbor who attended that housewarming party, turned out to be not just a gossip, but a retired social services worker. When she heard the story of Astrid and Killian abandoning me in Portugal, she felt it was her duty to inform her former colleagues. "Miriam, dear," she said, dropping in on me a week after my return. "I feel terrible that I didn't intervene sooner. I should have done something. You couldn't have known for sure it was true," I reassured her. Thus began the official testing of Astrid and Killian's parenting abilities. The social workers made several visits to their new rental apartment, a small 2-bedroom unit where the 5 of them now lived. They interviewed the children, examined their living conditions, and the family's financial situation. 2 weeks after the inspection began, Astrid called me for the first time since that day at the motel. "Mom," her voice sounded exhausted, "you have to help us. Social services is threatening to take the children away." "Take the kids away?" I was shocked. "On what grounds?" "They believe that our actions in Portugal prove that we are morally unfit as parents." Astrid could barely hold back her sobs. "Plus our current living conditions. Rexford and Rowena share a room, while Killian, Rosalind, and I have to sleep in the living room. I couldn't let my grandchildren get into the foster care system. I knew the system firsthand. I'd seen enough cases in my law practice to know that even with less than ideal parents, children are usually better off than in foster care. "I'll talk to Mrs. Potter," I promised. Maybe she could influence her former co-workers. After talking to Astrid, I contacted Mrs. Potter and asked her to intervene. "I understand your concern, Miriam," Mrs. Potter said after a phone call with someone from social services. "But they're not going to take the children away. It's standard intimidation procedure to get parents to take the necessary changes more seriously." I was relieved, but also irritated at Astrid, who appeared to be trying to manipulate me again. In the weeks that followed, I began to think seriously about the future. The house on Magnolia Street, which had been the center of the conflict, no longer brought me the same comfort. There were too many unpleasant memories, too strong an association with my daughter's betrayal. I began looking at real estate listings in other parts of the city, and then expanded my search beyond Knoxville. At my age, many people already write themselves off, believing that everything important has already happened. But I've always believed that life goes on as long as we breathe, and new beginnings are possible at any age. In late April, exactly 6 months after my ill-fated trip to Portugal, I found what I was looking for: a small but charming mountain cabin near Asheville, North Carolina. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room with mountain views, a large garage that could be converted into a carpentry shop, and a garden plot where I could grow not only flowers, but vegetables as well. When I announced my decision to sell the house and move, Astrid's reaction was predictable. You can't just leave. What about the kids? They're used to having you around. Asheville is only 3 hours away, I reminded her. And we have cell phones, video calls. Plus, my new house will have 2 bedrooms, one for me, one for guests. The kids will be able to come for weekends or vacations. What about the money? Astrid asked after a pause. From the sale of the house? This is it, I thought, the real reason for her concern. Part of it will be used to buy a new house, I answered flatly. I'll invest the rest to ensure a comfortable old age and leave an inheritance for my grandchildren when the time comes. What about me? Astrid asked bluntly. You won't leave me anything? After you tried to steal my house and abandoned me in a foreign country? Be thankful I'm not suing you and paying for your children's education. 2 weeks later, my house on Magnolia Street was sold to a young couple with a young child. A week before I left, I invited my grandchildren to say goodbye to the house they had spent so much time in. But we'll be visiting you at your new house too, won't we? Rosalind asked, holding Mr. Fluffy in her arms. You promised. Of course, honey, I hugged her. You'll have your own room in the new house, and you can come whenever you want. Can't we come in the summer, on vacation? Rexford asked. It must be great in the mountains. I'm counting on it, I smiled. We could hike, swim in the lake, and I could teach you the basics of carpentry. Astrid, who had been standing off to the side, suddenly said, Of course they can come on vacation, if you really want to see them. I always want to see my grandchildren, I replied, looking her straight in the eye, no matter what happens between us. On the day of the move, I expected Astrid and Killian not to show up. It was a work day after all. But to my surprise, they showed up to help with the last of the boxes. We took the day off, Astrid explained, noticing my surprise. We decided that helping Mom was more important. Killian nodded silently, avoiding my eyes. He still felt awkward in my presence. We worked together for a few hours, loading the last of our belongings into the van. Gertrude also came to help and say goodbye, though I assured her that we would see each other often. When everything was ready, I walked around the empty house one last time, saying goodbye to every room, every corner that held memories. Stepping out onto the porch, I looked back at the house one last time, then resolutely closed the door. The drive to Asheville took a little over 3 hours. When we finally arrived at my new home, the sun was already starting to set, painting the mountains in golden hues. The house looked beautiful, wooden, with a large veranda, surrounded by pine trees. The air was fresh, smelling of pine needles and wildflowers. I could feel the tension of the last few months starting to let go. When the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, we sat on the veranda, drinking tea and watching the first stars appear in the sky. For the first time in a long time, there was no tension between us, no intimacy either, but at least there was some semblance of truce. It's beautiful here, Killian said, breaking the long silence. I can see why you chose this place. I nodded. It's peaceful, the perfect place to start a new life. A new life, Astrid echoed. Sounds, promising. It is, I confirmed, for all of us. At that moment, I didn't know if I would ever be able to forgive them completely, but I knew one thing for sure. The past must stay in the past. Revenge, even just revenge, is not truly satisfying. And I was ready for a new chapter, in which I would not be just a mother or a grandmother, but first and foremost myself, Miriam Holiday, a woman who, at 72, had the courage to start anew.